Hey, it's Sandy with the Common Ground Alaska podcast, and today I have the honor of hanging out for a minute with Doug and Andy from Hand Hewn Farm. If you attended last year's expo, you'll recognize these guys. They were the ones who did the pig processing class last year. And today we're going to have a little different conversation with them. We're just going to talk about home butchering. So I'm excited to get started. Welcome, guys.
Hello,
Hi
thank you for
there.
having us.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Well, I'm Andy, and
I'm Doug.
we are in Ohio currently. So we make a pretty long trek to get out to the expo, but it's pretty great so far. Yeah, we run a small farm in somewhat central eastern Ohio. Raise pigs. Most of our work is teaching educational classes, teaching people how to butcher, cure the pig. We also do beef classes. We consult with some restaurants and things like that to help them with their processing, like sort of value added products, curing and things like that. And that's pretty much what we do. And we travel all over the place doing that, 9 months out of the year?
We like to take the summers off if we can.
Yeah.
Well, that's what a great job to have if you can take the summers off, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, historically, it kind of lends itself with the seasons and the butchering cycle. Most times, people wouldn't do any slaughtering or butchering in the summer. Where we live, that's usually just a recipe for flies and yellow jackets, and if you don't have cold storage space where you can pretty quickly get a hot carcass chilled, it's just not a great idea. So usually around where we live, fall and winter and into the spring is typical. So we just kind of built our business model around that calendar year.
Makes sense to me. That's pretty great. So what made you think to actually do this, to travel to expos and different places and farms and teach people how to butcher?
Well, we are self-taught. So when we started, we really had no idea what we were doing. And we fumbled our way through a whole bunch of butchering experiences just with
Mistakes. He's saying
yeah,
mistakes.
yeah, mistakes. We made plenty of mistakes. Um, but over time, because we did it together, we still enjoyed the process and always had other friends with us and things like that. So we kept doing it. And we started running into people that saw us do it and, told us basically, we've never seen anyone do it this well, especially in like a home setting. So we were sort of asked basically just to do some workshops at people's farms. And they said they would get people there if we would teach a class. And from there, it just kind of started snowballing. And more people ask us, and then people, in the YouTube world found us and started making videos when they would come to classes, and the word just started spreading. And at first we would only do a couple of these a year, and it became very popular, especially after COVID started. People realized that if they really needed to butcher an animal, where we live anyway, most of the butcher shops got packed and filled very quickly, and they needed animals butchered and didn't know how to do it. And so people took that as an opportunity to start learning, and thankfully we were there to teach them.
Well, I think that's pretty neat. And there is a resurgence kind of going on of people wanting to learn how to process or butcher their own animals. And it's kind of feels like a lot of skills, it's a little bit of a lost art. We missed a couple generations, and so it wasn't, kids didn't grow up doing this, so we're having to relearn it. So the skill that you're giving people could last for generations, which I think is just really cool.
Yeah.
Well, your class last year was super popular. Actually, when we had you guys up last year, I thought it was going to be kind of a one-time thing. We'd focus on butchering one year, and then maybe the next year we'd focus on something different. But it was so popular and it was so good that we couldn't help but invite you back. So this year you're doing a pig. I think that's going to be really good. I didn't realize you did a cow, so maybe one year we'll have you do a cow just to kind of shake things up a little
Maybe
bit.
half of them now.
Do half
Yeah.
of a cow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what are
We've
we going to
butchered
do with
full beef before, but it takes a little bit longer than a pig.
I imagine. I'm just envisioning like you guys leaving, and there I am standing with the other half of the beef. I
Yeah,
hope
yeah.
I'll have to go
That's
back
probably
and watch
how it
the
would
video.
work. Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. All right. So today, we were going to talk about best tools to have on hand for home butchering. And this is really helpful because we've butchered our own animals, and I chuckle when I say that because it is kind of butchered. We don't always necessarily know the cuts. We just kind of follow the grain of the meat and see what we end up with. And um, so learning how to actually do it properly is probably going to be very important. But sometimes you get into something and you realize, oh, I don't have, whatever tool it is, or uh you have something and it really doesn't work. So I think it's really great that you're willing to just kind of take a minute, tell us, okay, what do you just really need to do this successfully? Because when you spend all the time raising your animal, the last thing you want to do is ruin anything in the processing part of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, we can go as deep and extensive with tools and equipment, or as base as you please. When we started, we didn't have anything, and so that's how we got accustomed to butchering. In fact, we didn't have anything that you would call a butcher knife. For the first probably 3 years and 7 pigs, I just used a fillet knife, because most people can open their kitchen drawer of knives and not find a sharp one in the lot, and that was my case. And so the sharpest knife I had in the house was a fillet knife.
The one you didn't use usually.
Correct. And so that's what I used because it was the sharpest.
Yeah.
And while I wouldn't necessarily butcher a whole pig by choice today with a fillet knife, it does the job. And I did that for a lot of years. And then, the knife obviously is important, and we'll talk more about the knives that we use. But the other equipment again is very base, and we can explain to people what first of all, what's your budget? Most times people want to be incremental as they build their selection of equipment, and we're pretty specific, and we'll walk down that road with you about the order in which we would upgrade equipment or get better equipment. And then, at the end of the day, one of the most important questions throughout all of butchering, and then your equipment will follow suit, is what are you hoping to get out of this? Why are you butchering it? To what ends? Is this just going to be fresh meat that's going to go in the freezer and then end up on the grill or in the oven or in the skillet? Or is this going to be cured meat? Or are you hoping to make value-added products like hot dogs or bolognas or more fancy pâtés and such? All of those questions kind of point in the direction of other equipment. So starting with really base stuff, we use a boning knife, which looks something like this. This is a 6-inch boning knife. We tell people, while we can give a few recommendations on brands, makes, and models, the most important thing for us is that it feels good in your hand, and that you can put a sharp edge on it. For our purposes, we prefer a high carbon steel knife over a stainless steel knife, even though stainless is incredibly powerful, strong, and almost indestructible. It is that strength and durability that makes it really hard to sharpen well. So the high carbon steel, while not as indestructible as stainless, is far easier for us to put an edge on. So this is a boning knife, which we use for, I would say 95% of our butchering.
Mhm.
So from the sticking of
Okay.
the pig, the opening of the animal, the butchering of the animal, even the shaving and the trimming, this is used for 95% of our work. So if you have one of these, you're already off to the races. If you don't, depending on where you live in the country, we would point you to antique stores, if such a thing exists in your neck of the woods, for old cutlery. One company is Dexter. Another is Old Hickory, Chicago Cutlery, to name a few. You can usually find really old but well-kept high carbon steel knives that just need a little bit of love and attention to put a nice fine edge back on them. You can also get a new model from most of the companies I just mentioned. They're still in operation today. So if you need one ordered, that's what I would recommend. And I would look for a boning knife. I said 95% of our butchering is done with this knife. The other 5% would be done with this knife right here, which is a breaking knife. It's quite a bit bigger. That's a 10-inch breaking knife. It has a bit of a curve to the tip. And the reason for that is, and the reason it's called a breaking knife is when the carcass is whole on the table, whether this is a beef or a moose or a pig, this is what breaks the whole thing down into primal cuts, usually quarters. And the reason for the pointed tip, like that scimitar profile, is as you push this through from one side to the other, the tip will pop out and you can see where you're at and track it across the animal as you draw it back towards yourself. So we'll use this knife throughout the butchering process. And when we do, we find it pretty valuable. But if we didn't have it, it would not stop us from breaking down the animal. It's handy to have for the long, confident stroke of the longer edge.
And to step back before the knife usage, I mean, I know that in Alaska, a lot of the meat that is butchered is wild game. Most of the animals that we're butchering they're domestic animals or domesticated animals, and we're putting them down with a firearm. So I did want to speak for just a moment about that. If you're hunting, obviously you could be with a bow or different types of rifles or shotguns. That would depend on the animal and the way you like to hunt. But if it is a domesticated animal on your farm, larger animals like pigs and beef, we were always told when we got started to use a 22, and a 22 long rifle can work for pigs and beef. But anyone that shot a lot of pigs or beef with a 22 long rifle has a story of when it did not go the way they wanted it to. So we will concede that most of the time the 22, if it's a well-placed shot, can work, but we've actually gone to a 410 shotgun with a slug as the round, not birdshot or buckshot. It's a slightly larger round, has a lot more concussive force, and it won't break the bank to buy one or to have one. It's a great farm gun. But we do like to tell people that we use the 410 just because it gives you a little bit of added insurance when you're putting down the animal so that the death is quick and swift.
And almost every time we'll find the slug in the skull, in the cranium. So it's not like it travels through the animal. It does exactly what we want it to do and not anything more.
Yeah, so I wanted to track back to that part first because we do use that tool is very important for us when we're putting down animals because we want it to be very quick and humane. And then from that point, like if we're going through like chronologically, that's the first main tool that we use. And then we use the boning knife, like Doug said, for the sticking of the animal to bleed it out. And then from that point, like if we just go chronologically, when we're dealing with, again, larger animals, I'm not going to get into the specifics of pigs because there's some specific tools with pigs that you would use if you're scalding and scraping the pig. That's a rabbit hole that I don't think we need to go down for this portion of the class. But if you're putting down, again, I'm talking about larger animals, it is a good thing to have a location and some way to hoist that animal into the air so that you can clean it well, eviscerate it easily. That could be a chain hoist or just a tractor with a bucket, block and tackle, or a certain like electric winch or something like that. It does make handling larger animals a lot easier if you have something like that. Most people with homesteads have those things already, but it is good to mention them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I have to give a shameless plug to my husband, who is the farmer in the summer. In the winter, he makes knives, and he's just started making some fillet knives and some boning knives. And
great.
So, yeah,
Is he
I'd be
gonna have
interested.
some there? Is he
He
gonna have some at the expo?
Yeah, he'll have some at the expo. And so it was interesting hearing you talking about what's helpful because he's always asking, how can I make a better knife? And his knives are beautiful. So
Yeah.
for anyone listening, Common Ground Bladesmith, shameless plug, but he's incredible.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, now you can
Yeah.
continue.
Well, and to add on to that, we've had lots of discussions with people. They say, well, I got this knife and it was sharp for a while and now it's not sharp and I don't know exactly what to do with it or how to sharpen it. And there are a whole bunch of different sharpening systems, be it like little jigs that you use stones with, or belt sanders or different things like that. We use whetstones to sharpen ours. And we're also not here to preach that you have to use those, but you do want to find a way to keep your knife sharp. If you have a friend that'll sharpen it for you, great. If you have some system that you buy that works for you, also excellent. But it is good to have some way to maintain that knife so you always have it sharp and ready.
It is, and I just have him, but
Yeah, well, that's perfect. That's
Yes.
perfect. Yeah,
You win.
yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
that's like
but he
a
does.
tertiary tool that is good to have, some way to sharpen the knife.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right. Okay, so what's our next tool?
Well, okay, just one more caveat, because again, we do lots of pig processing, but we also do beef. And the thing is, like, pigs are unique in that they don't have a hide, they have a skin. All the other animals that you could think of, whether it's bear or moose or sheep or goat or deer, they all have a hide. And in that respect, we would encourage a skinning knife, which is different than a boning knife. Ours looks something.
You're gonna get off the wall.
Yeah, me as well. Ours looks something like this. This is a Skinner. We love this knife. It's a little bit of a deeper belly. It's not sharp. It's not pointy on the end, so you're not going to accidentally poke into something when you're skinning. But the curvature of the belly of the knife makes it so that when you're using it, the movement of your wrist and the belly of the knife do a really efficient job at removing the hide as you pull it away from the animal. So if you are doing any other animal besides pigs, we would strongly recommend the use of a skinner or a skinning knife like this one.
Have you ever tried to use an ulu for skinning?
We
I
have
haven't.
not, but we know plenty of people that have.
I'm sure there are
Yeah.
people you know that have done that.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. It's an art. It's actually beautiful to watch.
I bet.
It's definitely a skill that's pretty neat. So,
And it
yeah.
does use that rounded blade, so it's
Mhm.
a similar idea of the rounded blade.
Right.
So I could see how that would be pretty efficient once you learned how to do it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Very good. What's next?
So after the animal is dead and hanging and cleaned out, there's usually have to take some step in getting into smaller sections, and usually there are bones in the way of that, and the knives that we mentioned don't go through those bones. And if you try to make them do that, they'll get really dull.
You'll dull a knife faster than your husband wants to sharpen it.
Yeah. So we use a bone saw. Many people use sawzalls, but we use just a bandsaw. Basically looks like a hacksaw. It's got this removable blade, so this is just a one directional saw blade. It's actually not tensioned right now, but I wanted to keep it untensioned because it's too loud to tension right now, and also to show people that you can just get replacement blades for this. And these are sold in lots of different lengths. This is the longest one we have, which is 25 inches. And then we have two other ones that are 17 inches and 21 inches, I think. But they are really handy to have as long as it's a good one. And we say a good one because we've used many at other people's farms that are not worth
Subpar.
anything. Yeah, they're kind of trash because the blade doesn't get tight enough. And if that blade is not tight enough, when you're sawing through something, it travels all over the place. So we don't always do this, but there is a company that we highly recommend if you're going to get a bone saw and you only want to ever buy one of them. The ones that we have are made by a company called Casco, Kasco. And the type of saw is called a camlock, Kamlock. We don't really recommend any other saw for that job, even though we know other people will use sawzalls. We don't like sawzalls because we enjoy not hearing one when we're working is the main reason. But also, especially if you're splitting the animal, it's really difficult, even though people will tell you they're really good at it. It's really difficult to stay right down the center of the spine if you're splitting an animal right down the middle, which is what we do for beef and pork. And if you get off of that spine, what you end up doing is your saw blade will go right into the loin area of your pig or beef, which is usually some of the more prized cuts in the pork chops and the ribeyes and the strip loin and things like that. So if it's not split well, you can really tear up those loin sections, which Doug and I prefer not to do. So we really highly recommend getting a good hand saw like the one I just showed you.
And that's, I'm assuming, something that once you buy it once, I mean, unless you're processing multiple animal, I mean, for just a home use, you purchased it once and you're done for life, probably.
Yeah, and you
Correct.
can get replacement blades. So that company also makes the blades. So if your blade gets dull, you just buy a new blade for, I don't know, $5, and then you're all
Nice.
set again.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really,
Very
really, um, it seems somewhat like who cares? It's just a saw, but it makes a huge difference in the process. It goes better, it's more efficient, and it makes you feel better about the work you're doing because it doesn't hack everything up like into a mess.
In a
right.
large
And
carcass like a beef or a moose, their ribs are so long that you don't have a choice but to cut them several times, which is how you end up with short ribs, because the long ribs have just been shortened. And the best way to do that is not with a sawzall. It's with a hand saw. If you have a commercial bandsaw, like a meat saw in your shop, then you're probably not tuning in to see what kind of tools you need right now to butcher, because a bandsaw, like a meat saw like that, is a pretty sophisticated piece of equipment that is not entry level by any means. And in fact, we had one for many years in our shop, and we elected not to use it. We ended up giving it away or trading it to a neighbor, because it was such a pain to clean that thing, that even though it was super fast, if you wanted to make ribeyes and you just set that fence, you zip right through the meat and the bone, and it would take no time at all. And then it would take you forever to clean all the cabinets and the pulleys and the blade, because it's just a slurry of meat and marrow and bone dust and fat. And so it just was never worth it to us to clean it, because we're not a commercial operation. If we cleaned it at the end of the day and we were processing all day long, that would be a different metric. But instead, we stick with the bone saw, the hand saw, and we love it. And we'll use that same saw to saw all the way through a whole beef from stem to stern, just like a small section of ribs in a pig. So it's a pretty versatile piece of equipment as far as that goes. We get about 1.5 to 2 pigs per saw blade, or 1 beef. So it's still pretty functional and economical.
yeah, so if a person was doing a pig and a beef, you might have two blades in a year, and
Sure.
you
Yeah,
spent $10.
maybe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
that's
we're pretty finicky about it. As soon as that blade starts to dull, we don't like using it because we know what it feels like to use a dull blade. So some people that we've been around are less concerned about its sharpness than we are. You could probably do more than that, but we don't like dealing with it after it starts to dull even a little bit.
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So those are the main tools I think that we would like. If you're getting started, get those 2 knives that Doug talked about, maybe a skinning knife if you're going to be skinning the animal, the bone saw, and those are like the big ones. Then beyond that, there are a bunch of other things that are going to make your job a lot easier and more enjoyable. This is a silly one. I happened to see them here in the shop and grabbed them, but just hooks to hang things. In Alaska, and even where we are at this time of year, if you were to put down an animal, it's cold enough outside that you can just hang it up. Some people try to, shove things in fridges and stuff like that, and we're not huge fans of that, especially with a freshly killed animal, just because it's very wet and it's good to get air around it. So hanging carcasses is always the better way to do it if you can. So having some way to hang the animal, you don't have to buy this specific hook or anything, but you want the hook to be big enough so that it will hold the weight of whatever animal you're hanging. But you could obviously use rope or things like that. You want to have something so you can hoist the animal and keep it there. And that's a lot of that stuff that we just went over is kind of like what we would call day one supplies. So supplies that we use when we're killing the animal, getting it cleaned and ready to actually butcher. And then if we start talking about the actual, like what we would call day two work, where we're actually butchering, those two knives that Doug mentioned are the main two tools that we use at that point. There might be occasion for this guy.
We have this awesome cleaver, which our knife maker friend made for us. We absolutely love it, but we don't use it all that often, and we don't use it all that often for a couple reasons. But it is, I'm bringing it up because it's not necessary, right? It is functional, and yes, if you want a bone-in pork chop, and you want to like clip the spine, which is like an awkward triangular bone after the pork chop is on the table. You've got your rib, or that's why it's a pork chop with a bone in. It's also called a rib chop, but that rib is attached to the spine, and historically, it makes an awkward, sharp triangle of a bone, and so it is chopped off with a cleaver, which is no doubt why it's called a pork chop. But this is not strictly necessary either. And if you go to many YouTube channels or butchering books, it will tell you that it's necessary, and it's not. It's handy, it's fun to have, but it's also one of those occasions where you even if you're super confident in yourself, in your hand-eye coordination, you are not going to drop that thing exactly where you think you're going to. And so when we do use it, we actually have a mallet that we strike the back of. We'll put the cleaver down exactly where we want to cut and then strike the back with a wooden mallet. And that way, no meat is compromised and everybody leaves with all their fingers.
That's like your pro tip there, right?
Yes.
So
Yes, that's
Leave with
exactly
all your
right.
fingers.
Leave with all your fingers.
yeah. Very good. Very
Um,
good.
The other tools that we use on like butchering day, the day we're cutting up the meat, and this is like a very generic way to describe it, but it's just have a bunch of containers to put things in while you're working. It can be bus tubs or meat lugs or, you know, grandma's Tupperware or whatever it is.
Bowls and trays.
Yeah, clean 5-gallon buckets. But once you start cutting the animal up, you'll have parts of it everywhere, and it's really good idea to have vessels to put those parts in. Like if some of it's going to be ground, you want that separate container, or if you have extra fat, you have another container for fat, or cuts that you're going to be packaging for the freezer, things like that. You can never have enough of those types of things. You can never have enough containers. Everything just starts multiplying, and then you don't know where to put things, and things get confused and lost. So it's very generic, but it is something we use quite a bit of. It's just containers.
We just have, because we process our own chickens too, and so we keep them overnight in ice water and all that. So for any processing, I have a set of tubs,
Yeah.
totes, sorry, down in the greenhouse, and that's all they're used for. And
Yeah.
just keep them cleaned out, and but it's kind of nice, like you say, to not be, because the first couple years we did this, I'd be like, oh shoot, I forgot the totes, and so then you're scrounging around and dumping out Christmas
Yeah.
Yeah.
And clean.
decorations and all whatever you can
Yeah.
find to have something that'll hold this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. And we always think we have enough, and we've done many workshops where it's like, well, we've run out of vessels.
Yeah.
So it's great. I mean, they can obviously be multi-purpose. You can use them for things when you're not butchering, but you really want to have a bunch of those when you do start cutting up the meat. And then again, this is another one. Along with containers, we always tell people you can never have enough counter or table space, because again, as you start cutting things up, and it's not really a tool, so maybe it doesn't fit into this discussion, but just workspace and places to set things, whether it's your sharp knives or whatever beverage you're drinking or all the different cuts of the meat. It's really hard to have enough space to work. Even if it's folding tables, while not ideal, just extra workspace is really, really handy to have. Then beyond that, usually once you get to the point where you've cut up most of the animal with those tools we already talked about, usually you want to package them in some way. And the packaging can be any number of things, but you do want to have that figured out. Some people don't like using plastic with vacuum bags. That's how we do most of our stuff, was with a vacuum sealer. If you don't really want to do all the plastic stuff, you can get butcher paper.
And if you do that, we strongly recommend wax-sided butcher paper so that one side is waxed, and the other side is not. If you try to wrap meat in butcher paper that is not waxed, you will find immediately why they sell waxed butcher paper.
Yeah, because the moisture will get through the paper and it'll become a mess. So,
and
yeah,
for local, I just want to interject this really quick. Three Bears butcher paper, wax butcher paper can be a little bit hard to find, but Three Bears does carry it. So that's a good local tip.
Well, and it's also called freezer paper too.
Yeah.
So you can sometimes find that.
And if and when we do use waxed butcher paper, it's, I think without exception, it's always following a wrap with cellophane. And the wrap with cellophane is what actually keeps that piece of meat from having air exposed to it or in contact with it, which is how freezer burn happens. So we wrap it tightly in the cellophane and then wax-sided butcher paper. Of course, the wax is around the cellophane and the non-wax is on the outside that you can label and write on. And then if you go that direction where you're using the freezer paper, then you're going to want freezer tape, which is a specific type of tape that doesn't fail under cold temps. So it will bind to the paper and to itself, but won't release when it's in the freezer.
Okay.
The other option, if you don't do the wrapping, would be the vacuum sealer. And there are two types of vacuum sealers that we use. There's the traditional like countertop food saver method or style where it's actually sucking air out of the bag. And they usually come in rolls of plastic, different sizes. You can buy pre-made ones, though they're quite pricey. But when you buy the rolls, you get different sizes, all the way up to gusseted bags, which can be very big. Like a whole chicken or maybe even a turkey can fit in a gusseted freezer bag. But the limitation there is you have to cut the bag to size and then seal one side before putting the meat in and then seal the other side once the meat is in. So there's a little bit of a bottleneck during sealing, but it's also a really excellent option. The other
it's a good introductory model.
It's a great introductory. We would never encourage someone to jump straight to the chamber vacuum sealer, which is the next step up from that. It's what we finally have, but we went years and years and years without something like that. A chamber vacuum sealer, if you have it, you already know what I'm talking about. If you don't even mess with it. It's like an entry-level model is going to be well over $1,000, and it's just not a home use justifiable sort of piece of machinery. But the next one of importance in the kind of equipment or machinery would be your grinder. For many years, Andy and I just used our KitchenAid like stand mixers with a grinder attachment, and that is how most homesteaders will get started. And in truth, there is nothing wrong with it, especially if you don't have 1,000 pounds of meat you need to grind. If you're breaking down a pig, you're going to have anywhere between 30 and 50 pounds of ground meat, probably. And 30 to 50 pounds of ground meat, it might take you 45 minutes to grind, but that's not a huge deal. What we would encourage, though, is if you have a KitchenAid grinder attachment, or an undersized grinder. By undersized, I mean your kid can pick this thing up and go put it away when you're done. It weighs 25 pounds. You got it for anywhere under $180. It's not going to be terribly powerful, probably a half of a horse, maybe 3/4, but not likely. If that's the case, you would be doing yourself and the grinder a lot of favors. If you cut all of the meat small or fat, small, and then even had it on trays in the freezer. Even freeze the grinder attachment, all the parts that go, the tray, the auger, the grinder head, put all of it in the freezer. And the reason is because grinders like that are not designed. If it has an auger, no matter what size it is, if it has an auger, it's not designed to push things, it's designed to chop things. And as long as it's really cold, firm, or set up, the grinder will be far more effective than if it were soft. Like the only time we'll ever hear our grinder bog down at all, and it's a 1 3/4 horse. The only time we'll ever hear it bog down is if someone's putting soft fat through it. Soft fat is way more work for that grinder than frozen meat, which is counterintuitive. But if you have an undersized grinder, I would strongly encourage you to cut it in small pieces and get everything as cold as possible first. I don't know that we would necessarily recommend brands. I mean, there's all of them are decent. Most of them are by horsepower, whether it's Weston or LEM or Meat, Cabela's. There's a whole bunch of really decent ones out there. But generally speaking, in our experience, the quality of the grinder is not because of the brand. It's commensurate with the horsepower that it has. So you're probably not going to buy a knockoff grinder that's 1.5 horse that you're going to be disappointed in. And conversely, if you buy a really like premium brand 1/2 horsepower grinder, you're probably going to be a little let down. So usually it's just commensurate with the amount of power it has. I think that's it as far as the grinder is concerned.
Yeah.
So what horsepower then do you recommend? 1.5?
We would say start with 1, but we also tell people like it's the most important piece of machinery you're going to buy early. So early on, you're going to want a grinder. You're going to need a grinder. Even if you don't want one, you're going to need one. And no one has ever bought a grinder that was too powerful. No one has ever said, this grinder is too strong.
Yeah.
It's too fast. It's too efficient. You're only going to wish that you had choked up a little bit more money and got a nicer one. So we just recommend that you get the most expensive one that you can justify.
And in that vein, we often tell people too, if the cost is a problem, hopefully you have some people near you. Sometimes you can just ask your neighbor, they might already have one they'll let you borrow. Because people, at least where we live, they're not butchering every weekend of the winter. If you, I mean, it's a little bit tricky depending on if you're all hunting at the same time, that becomes a little bit of an issue. But if you want to get a bigger grinder, but you can't afford it, and maybe your neighbor also wants one, go together and buy one together. These tools aren't something you're using every single day, so it's very easy to share these sorts of things. Same thing with the vacuum sealer, even. Any of those tools that are slightly more expensive, find people that will also use it. Maybe they don't use it as much as you, and they'll pay for 1/4 of it or something like that. Or you can buy, make it a little side hustle and buy really nice equipment and rent it to people that want to use it. You don't have to foot the whole bill. If you want to get the really good equipment, you can find ways to kind of subsidize the cost if you really want to get something that's a little bit out of your price range.
Yeah, which is a really great thought. I mean, in all honesty, we've got we have 2 really nice grinders, and we teach people how to do this butchering thing most weekends of the fall, winter, and spring. And our grinders sit unused for at least 340 days a year. And we do this all the time. There's no sense in a grinder sitting unused if our neighbor or friends could use it. So if there is a way that you can go cooperatively on the more expensive pieces of equipment, I would encourage that. The vacuum sealer, the grinder, and then next would probably be, and this depends on how far you feel like you can go down this road and not, I mean, sometimes it kind of can create some marital strife because the hobby can run away with itself pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But anywhere we travel that we drive to, which is anywhere within 7 hours of Ohio, we'll carry our slicer with us because we don't trust that the place we're going is going to have an adequate meat slicer. And the thing is, even if you don't ever get into cured meats and you're never going to have a prosciutto or a capicola that you need to slice really, really thin, you're probably going to have bacon before too long. Anybody that starts down the road of raising pigs or butchering pigs, like bacon is like in their radar while that is still a piglet. And yeah, you can cut bacon by hand, but it sure is nice to throw a slab of belly on the slicer and just zip, 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 zip. So that's probably the next,
you don't buy that right away.
You do not buy that right away. That's why I said it's sequential. All of the tools that you get, you can add to and kind of build the repertoire. but the slicer is eventually going to be something you're going to want to take seriously.
The one you might get, well, you probably would get before the slicer would be a sausage stuffer if you want to make length sausages or summer sausage or anything like that. A good sausage stuffer is nice, but it might not be the first thing. It should not be the first thing you buy.
But it's also how we package our ground. So whether it's ground beef or ground pork, instead of, which for a long time we tried to like manually try to fit ground meat into a bag or a vacuum bag. And I don't know why we did that for so long. We one day just realized we've got this stuffer right here that stuffs right through a tube. So we load up our stuffer. We just put an empty bag on the end of the stuffer horn, and just a few cranks later, you have a full bag of ground meat, and you just keep going. So it's a very efficient way, especially if you're grinding large amounts of meat, to put it away very quickly and a lot.
I don't know if you saw the light bulb come on over my head.
Huh,
We,
huh.
we've had a sausage stuffer forever, and we've never
Yeah,
used it because we just like bulk
we don't
sausage
link
or whatever.
sausages. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But we do when we get a moose, that's a
Yeah,
lot of hamburger.
a
And
lot of
I'm doing
ground.
what you're
Right.
doing in the gallon Ziploc
100%.
bag.
Yeah, just
Well,
put it in the
actually,
stuffer and put it into the
I put them
bag.
in plastic wrap first, but or not gallon, in the quart size Ziploc bags. And
Yep.
but how I never even thought about. I
Yeah,
always
neither
was
do we.
thinking of
Literally, Tanny, it took
pacing.
us years, and it took us years. And when our light bulb went off, we kind of felt really dumb
Yeah.
because it's like, well, we use this thing, we use all of this stuff all the time. Why did we not connect these two dots?
Mhm.
Oh, for
So
heaven's
what we
sake.
do is we'll feed a sleeve, a vacuum sleeve, onto the stuffer tube, and just 2.5 cranks later, we've got, a pound or a pound and a half of ground. And you just rip through the whole thing that way,
You
and
can do it whatever size you want
your
too.
hands stay clean. It's such a nice process. It's great.
Nice.
It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Very
What
nice.
else? I mean, and at this point, it's really like getting into, you know, running down different rabbit holes as far as what you want to get out of your end product. Like if you have moose and you make jerky, it's nice to have a dehydrator, or
Sous vide.
we make a lot of stock with the bones from our pigs. So we have a really big stock pot. It's not completely necessary, but we can take all the bones and any extra stuff from the pig and do it in one pot.
And our stock pot has a valve on the bottom,
Mhm.
which is very like bougie. But I mean, we bought it used. It's a humongous stainless steel pot with a quarter turn valve on the bottom, and it's a stock pot. And when we found out how expensive it is, like if you were to buy it retail, we felt embarrassed to recommend it to people. It's over $1,000 just for this pot.
Yeah.
But then we
Yeah, you don't need
learned
that pot.
yeah, we learned that you can get it from homebrew supply places for a fraction of the cost, because homebrew doesn't need to sit on your stovetop on simmer all day long like a commercial piece of restaurant equipment does. The stainless is way thinner. It's quite a bit cheaper, but for stock, it's ideal.
Because it has a valve.
Because it has a valve. So what we'll do is we'll load the whole thing up with all the bones, carrots, celery, onions, whatever you want to do to flavor your stock. And then of course, all the fat just rises to the surface. And then when it's time, you just open the spigot on the bottom right through a strainer
Yeah, we have like a
into
mesh
your
strainer.
containers. You're not pouring anything off. You don't have to ladle anything off. You don't even have to remove the bones. You just strain all the stock, and that fat rides all the way down until it's to the bottom. It's lovely. But
I
again,
didn't know there was such a thing, but I make gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons of stock
yeah.
because we have all these
Mm,
animals that we do,
Be a
and
pot with a spigot at the bottom.
yes, yeah,
uh,
it's absolutely worth looking
sounds
into.
life-changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, if you do like a homebrew supply place has many different sizes, types, and models, and they're going to be way cheaper than if you go to a restaurant supply or
Yeah.
a restaurant equipper, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to back up just a second because we made the mistake. We bought a vacuum sealer um, many moons ago, and I didn't really have any experience with a vacuum sealer, so I didn't know anything about them. I just went to Sportsman's Warehouse and bought the cheapest one they had and brought it home and was super proud of it.
Mhm.
And we did have friends who vacuum seal salmon and they'd bring it to us and it was beautiful and it would sit in our freezer and I'd pull it out 6 months later and it's just as beautiful as when we put it in. And then we had this vacuum packer that I am not a person who says bad words, but that thing was just about brings it out of you.
Mhm.
We had stuff that was just buried. It was only in there for maybe a week, and I'd pull it out, and the bag's all crystallized inside. It's all full of air.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can we talk for just a second? I totally agree that you shouldn't go take out, you shouldn't put a second mortgage on your house to buy
Yeah.
butchering supplies. But at the
Mhm.
same time, there's got to be a warning about this crappy stuff that
Sure.
Yeah.
is really not, and it's not only is it a waste of time, you're wasting your food because I mean,
Mhm.
you can cut the freezer burn off, but eventually it's just not
Yeah,
palatable at
no,
all. And
that's no
so
good.
so if we can touch on that for just a second. How do you know if you're just walking into Cabela's or if you're walking into, just a big box place,
Yeah.
or what do you need to avoid buying there and actually go to restaurant supply or butcher supply store?
Yeah, we've actually had some different experiences. Like it's not the bottom shelf necessarily, but like the most ubiquitous version that we found is made by food company called Food Saver. I mean, you can get them at Walmart and like you see them all over. And we've had some made by Food Saver that are fantastic. We've had one for like, I don't know,
Yeah, at
9 years,
least.
and it's still going strong and does great work. And others made by the same company work for like 2 weeks and then it's crapped out.
Mhm.
Um, so that part, like when you're looking at those sort of residential models, is sort of a crapshoot. And I can't really speak to the other models because I haven't really, like the real cheap ones we haven't used. But Food Saver is usually pretty good.
But also it's really important to know that if you are done with the vacuum sealing process and there's no air in that bag and it's sealed and it fails later, it's not because of the vacuum sealer. I hate to tell you this. It was either
Okay.
the bags or user error. So
Well, it
one
wasn't user error, of course, so it must have been the bad.
No,
no,
rule
not in
that
your
out.
case. No,
Rule that
clearly,
out.
clearly not. But sometimes it happens that if you're not really careful, there can be even the tiniest wrinkles in the bag where the seal is. And so if
Okay.
air can travel from outside to inside, that's how the seal fails. If it's a cheap plastic like the lesser mill um,
Yeah,
and
thinner
the
bags.
thinner bags,
Mhm.
it's not impossible for the bag to fail. But if it's sealed at the time of vacuuming, the vacuum sealer isn't what created a fail there, like something else did. So the bag could have gotten a puncture in it. It could have let air in through the seal, or something could have punctured it, like if they're not, maybe not with salmon fillet, for example, but like ribeyes, or any kind of a rib, it's really hard to saw them in a way that they're not sharp on the edges. And when you have that tight vacuum, um, but anyway,
And just handling the bags roughly after they're
yeah,
sealed
that's
sometimes
that's
can do it
true.
too.
That's true. There are different types of seals as well. Some of them have a single bar, but if you are like, let's say you just cannot afford for this to fail. And I get it. I hear exactly what you're saying. Like it should never fail. You're putting your food away for your
That's right.
family. You should not like it should not be a roll of the dice. But when you use a food saver style, you can always double seal it. Okay, so you would put one end in, shut it, and seal it. Then if you cut the end off right close to the seal, you can put it in and seal it a second time. And you can do that both ends. So then you would turn the bag around, you would actually vacuum it this time, and you would do the same thing, cut it off, and then put an additional seal on it. And yes, that's more steps, but if that's all it takes, it's not the vacuum sealer at all. It's just a matter of time.
Okay. With our chickens, we use those Duncan seal
Yeah.
bags. Have you seen those?
Yep.
Yep.
And I always wonder, why are those fail proof?
So much better.
And
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
machine, I'm literally using a straw inside the
Yeah.
carcass of my chicken
Yeah.
to draw out all the air out of this
Yeah.
chicken. And
And
then
in
I
that
buy a
case,
machine that's not working.
Mhm.
yeah, in that case, it's kind of funny too, because we used to wrap everything, like Doug was saying earlier, with like food
Cellophane.
service
Mhm.
film and then the paper. And the nice thing about that is if you put the cellophane, that film on it really, really tightly and then wrap it well, even if there is a puncture, it's really, really localized and isolated. It's just a small spot where you'll get freezer burn. Where in a vacuum bag, what's holding that stuff in its shape is the fact that there's no air in there. And as soon as air gets in there, that bag puffs out. But in the case of like those shrink bags for the chickens, you're actually reforming that plastic, so even if air gets in there, that bag doesn't expand anymore because of the way you're shaping it. So
Sure.
that is the one downfall of the vacuum bags, is that when air gets in, it gets in pretty much everywhere. When in those
Yeah.
other two systems, it's sort of shaped to whatever that chunk of meat is.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now that being said, there are models above the Food Saver model, like the same companies that make the vacuum sealers for home use, like the Westons, the LEMs, the Cabela's, the Meat, Made by Meat. Just about every one of those companies makes a nicer version of what Food Saver is. And those really won't break the bank. I think you can get like those introductory models for like anywhere from $200 to $400, which sounds like a lot, but if it gives you a little
If it
more,
lasts, it's worth it.
yeah, they're usually a little more durable. The components are a little bit higher quality
Yeah.
than Food Saver types. Yeah.
Well, and if a person, what we're trying to do, because like currently we process all of our own chicken. And if we get a moose, then we'll process that ourselves just because it's easier. But we like our beef is heading to the butcher next week,
Yeah.
and we're just paying to have that done. But I'm trying, what I in my perfect world is however much it costs to do that beef, I want to invest that same amount of money in s-
Yeah.
getting
Because over
closer to
time,
being
you'll end
able
up
to do
saving
this
a lot of
myself.
Oh
money.
yeah.
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 You'll pay yourself back many times over, even if you got really good equipment.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking. And I want to like you said, I'd rather have it and share anyway. Is there one piece, I guess. So here's I'll ask this question with the story and then we can finish up. But we've never had a chicken plucker. So
Okay.
when you don't have a chicken plucker, you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah.
And then a friend of ours, her
That's a
husband
heavy.
passed away and she just wasn't going to raise chickens anymore. So she gave us her chicken plucker, and it's kind of a neat symbiotic relationship because now she gets chickens from us every year. But getting that chicken plucker revolutionized chicken
Of
Yeah.
course it is. Of course it
processing
is.
Yeah.
day
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us. It's
Yeah.
one
Yep.
of the you don't know what you don't have
Yeah.
until you
Right.
have it. And now
Yeah.
I hope we never end up in primitive times and have to go without that chicken plucker again.
Sure.
Yeah.
So is there one piece of equipment, if someone's like they have like three to $500 that they want to just invest in one thing, what would you recommend starting with, whether it's some type of a machine or equipment or a tool or whatever?
I mean, the good grinder is, it's not exactly like the chicken plucker, but when you, like Doug was saying, we used to use a KitchenAid grinder, and going from that type of grinder to the grinder that we have now,
Oh.
yeah, I mean, it reduces the time that you're standing in front of a grinder. I mean, dramatically. Um, so I might say that, yeah, that might be my answer as far
If
as
I
that
had
goes.
extra money to burn for the butchering process, I would buy one of these handsome leather aprons from Hand Hewn Farm.
Yeah, a leather apron, yes.
A leather apron. Okay, noted.
One thing though that we did not talk about that's actually
Talk about the
kind of
combo.
important to Andy and I. We would never butcher on anything but a wooden surface. If we have to butcher on like a poly surface, we hate it. And we do the whole thing a little more gingerly with our knives. But a wooden cutting surface is absolutely a non-negotiable for us. A lot of folks will be like, well, I've got the stainless tables. I'm ready to have you guys come. And we're like, well, we would never, I know why they're thinking that. I understand the thought process behind, the cleanability and kind of the industrial, nature of it. But we only use butcher block wooden tables to cut on. And I don't know that this would be easily had in Alaska, but around the Midwest, people don't bowl like they used to. And you can get sections of bowling alley for really, really, really cheap. And if you get just a section of bowling alley, you can turn that into a really nice butcher block top. Now, if you have a sawyer or a craftsman near you that can make a butcher block top or island, that would absolutely be one of the things that I would splurge on. Everything else you could add in time to that, but the butcher block top is really invaluable to us.
Okay, and I'm taking notes because I remember last year I gave you cheap plastic tablecloths and
Yeah,
cheap
yeah,
plastic
yeah,
cutting
100%.
boards, and
Yeah,
you didn't say a word, but now I
we
know. We'll do
forgot all
better.
about it
Yeah.
already.
Wood is better for sure. One other
That's
thing,
awesome.
and I don't know how much people need it in Alaska. But the one thing that we have in our shop that we use all the time is a little more expensive. But we have a walk-in cooler. But the walk-in cooler is not like a traditional walk-in cooler. It's basically an insulated room with an air conditioner that's running off of a little computer controller called a CoolBot. So we basically have built a cold room that can maintain 36, 37 degrees whenever we want it to.
And without industrial or commercial cooling systems. So there's no compressor, evaporator, condensers, like all of the industrial stuff that require an HVAC tech. We ripped all of that out and just put in a window AC unit. So it keeps our cold storage space cold 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And because it's a window air conditioning unit, instead of something larger or more industrial, it barely moved our electric bill.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. So, and it sounds like it's something you could almost put together yourself. When you're at the expo this year, make sure you touch base with Sam Knapp. He's a farmer up here. He's doing the same thing. It sounds like exactly what you're doing with it's his modern day. He even wrote a book about it. His modern day root cellar, and he's got
Okay.
the cool bots and stuff, keeping it just
Yeah.
just
That's right.
right. Everything is just right, and so. Yeah, that's fun. So it's universal. You could use it for all sorts of different things. And
Oh,
Yeah, because you can
absolutely.
regulate the temperature. If you want that room to be 50 degrees, you just set it to be 50 degrees and it holds that temperature.
Yeah, and if
does
you get wild game or you have to put an animal down in the spring, summer, or fall, and it's not cold enough to hang it outside, the idea of hanging it in the cold storage for until you get around to it, whether it's eggs or dairy or produce, like everything could go in the cold storage.
Yeah.
So it's really, really great.
okay. All right. Well, I think this has been super informative. We're looking forward to having you guys back this year. And so, just so you know, they'll be here for about a day and a half. We're gonna show us a bit of portions of a slaughtering demonstration first, and then you guys will cut up the pig and show us what all to do with it. And you're open to talking about other wild game and stuff while you're demonstrating, correct? So
Yeah.
people kind of get a good basic idea of just what to do with this animal once you've got
Yeah,
it.
conceptually, if it's a four-legged animal, they're all very similar in their structure, just proportions change, but very similar in how you would cut it up.
Okay, perfect. Well, we're really looking forward to having you guys. Thanks for making the trek up, and I guess we'll see you in a couple months.
Yeah,
All right,
sounds great.
sounds good.
Thanks,
All
Danny.
right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.